At the beginning of the 90s, Lorena Bobbitt's situation was a real hell. Not only was she in a foreign country, but she was at the mercy of John's relentless violence. Her husband appeared to be a typical, attractive, and pleasant American citizen, but in private he often acted sadistically. Just to give an example, on the very night of their marriage, he had drunk too much and forced her into having sex. That, far from being an exception, had become part of their routine, a routine that was becoming more and more brutal. Another time, John was driving drunk with her in the car, becoming increasingly reckless. Lorena had wanted to take the wheel of the car to avoid an accident, but he had hit her hard in the chest, leaving her breathless. After his repeated attacks, he would often say that he would not do it again. He would regret it, apologize, but the peace would only last a few days. The torment would then return, recharged. From that moment, Lorena was subjected to physical abuse without cause or warning, leaving her breathless and battered. The only thing he did afterwards was apologize with all kinds of excuses and swore he wouldn't do it again, but he always relapsed. Lorena wanted to escape the vicious circle but didn't know how, as she was unable to defend herself. Back then, it wasn't easy for women in her situation to speak publicly about their sufferings. In addition, she spoke little English and her husband didn't allow her to see her few friends. These friends, all work colleagues, witnessed some of John's jealous outbursts and wanted to warn her to leave him as soon as possible. They even suggested to her that he could end up killing her, but those words were not enough. Knowing that she was on a more than dangerous countdown, the woman gathered courage and finally went to the police. Without wasting a second and trembling, she showed the officers the marks on her body. The officers took her complaint and John was called to testify. However, as strange as it may seem, they could not prove that the subject was really a threat. Lorena did not stop or let that demoralize her. She would repeat the complaint another 5 times, always in vain. It seemed that evil was destined to win the battle. When John noticed that the other was beginning to wane in her efforts, he doubled down and started to extort her. If she continued trying to report him, he would report her to immigration. That was the final blow. Lorena was trapped, a prisoner of an endless ordeal, knowing one call could get her deported with no way out. Then came the night when she lost her patience, a night when revenge materialized in a savage way. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Many marriages tragically end in fatalities. The term gender violence has gained prominence in recent years, but it has always existed. Women have to endure countless physical and psychological abuses, many meet the worst fate, others end up taking revenge on their aggressors. All these cases proliferate in the police section of the media and some have become famous. But there was one with an atypical outcome, which had a massive reach and became part of popular culture. Narrating this domestic nightmare will take us to June 23, 1993. The day Lorena Bobbitt cut off her partner's penis. Before she was globally known by her husband's surname and for her revenge, Lorena Bobbitt was known by the surname Gallo. She was born on June 18, 1970 in Bucay, Ecuador. When she was very young, her family moved to Caracas, Venezuela, where she lived until she was 18 years old. In 1986, the Gallos migrated once again, but this time to the United States. Soon after, the clan's parents went back to Latin America, but Lorena had different plans. She was impressed by the American lands, where everything seemed possible. She believed that she too could fulfill the famous American dream there. She had faith to achieve it, having learned from her parents the value of work and sacrifice. That, combined with her will and enthusiasm, made her a good candidate for a golden future full of achievements. She was unaware that staying in the United States would lead to her downfall. Lorena got a roof over her head thanks to Gianna Bisutti, a friend of her mother. There she received affection and discipline, as she had to work as a nanny for the youngest son of the woman who was hosting her. For this work, Lorena received a salary that allowed her to save some money. Fond of her, Gianna even got her a student visa so she could stay in the country regularly. Little by little, her plans seemed to be taking shape. Instead of settling for her nanny duties, Lorena started frequenting Jana's beauty salon. There she learned the trade of manicure and soon became an employee of the business, a very good employee. To be more precise, she demonstrated that she knew how to take care of the customer's hands, and that was the beginning of an increasingly independent life. Lorena worked non-stop for several months until she found the opportunity to take a night off. She also wanted to enjoy a bit of the American nightlife, so she asked for some advice and threw herself into the adventure. Ready to unwind. After long work days, the young Ecuadorian woman went to a nightclub where she had fun with some friends she had made some time ago. It was that night when a tall, thin but sturdy man approached her, greeting her with a simple hello. He introduced himself as John Bobbitt. She fell for his charm, and that was the first step of a terrible descent into madness. Unlike Lorena, John Wayne Bobbitt was a purebred American. He was born on March 23, 1967 in Buffalo, New York. His childhood was turbulent. As a boy, his mother had a nervous breakdown and couldn't care for him or his siblings. In this way, all the children ended up moving to their aunt and uncle's house, who instilled in them a religious education. John got along well with them and his cousins, but lived with the stigma of having been rejected. Thanks to being raised in that strict home, the teenager acquired a strong discipline. This led him to be attracted to military life. Driven to excel, he joined the Army and later the Marine Corps. In that tough environment, he proved he could meet the challenge and received an even more rigorous education. He dreamed of more promotions and medals, and that's what he was focused on the night he went out for a few drinks. That's when Lorena crossed his path. John captivated the girl instantly, so they both stayed talking for a long time. He told her that he was attracted to her exotic features and her eyes, and she told him about her origin and her arrival in the United States. They talked non-stop and even danced on a dance floor. As midnight neared, Lorena said goodbye and John asked for her number. The young woman refrained from giving it to him, primarily due to her modesty. However, Marin, far from seeing this as a hindrance, smiled and told her not to worry, that he would find a way to contact her. Even though it seemed they would never cross paths again, John kept his promise, and after getting her phone number, somehow he called her. He openly expressed his fondness for Lorena and his desire to continue seeing her. Back then, she might have suspected that the intensity of the guy could be a warning sign, but she also felt flattered by his persistence. And that's how she agreed to a date. That would be the start of a relationship that seemed promising, but would end up being very painful. Lorena and John's courtship was difficult. In that call, she felt happy to hear the other's voice, but explained that she lived in someone else's house and had to follow certain rules. To start, she was still very young and Jana wouldn't let her be alone with him. But she came up with an idea. Every time they met, one of the woman's daughters would accompany them. The mechanism worked. After a while, John not only earned Lorena's trust, but also that of everyone around her. They found him to be a pleasant, healthy, and polite young man. His professed religious values were also significant. In fact, this made it possible for the girl to get the green light to invite him to dinner at Jana's home. That night, there was a pleasant and relaxed meeting, but the hostess emphasized that the young woman was still under her responsibility. She said she believed in the couple, but asked them not to let her down. John expressed his commitment to the relationship and his resolve to fortify it. After consideration, Jana chose to trust him and declared that she would be a new member of the family from that point forward. 10 months later, Lorena and John's relationship had solidified. She was happy and content, and the outlook became even brighter. On a beach afternoon, he proposed to her. Surprised and moved, Lorena accepted. The wedding took place on June 18, 1989, which was also Lorena's 19th birthday. It was a modest ceremony to the point that neither of their parents could be there. This did not prevent the newlyweds from enjoying the moment. Lorena, in particular, felt like she was in paradise. She was excited about the fact that everyone would now know her as Lorena Bobbitt. The couple had very specific plans. After the honeymoon, they would move to Manassas, a city in Northern Virginia. They thought it would be the ideal setting to build a life together. But that dream of love and progress turned into a nightmare of violence and humiliation. Until Lorena had enough. And that's how our story comes back to the beginning. On the night of June 23, 1993, the Bobbitt residence would be the scene of another routine of aggressions. John arrived drunk, slamming the door. Lorena had fallen asleep, so she woke up with a start. She didn't have time to react to her husband's advances, who tore off her clothes. She tried to struggle and begged him not to touch her, but he was stronger and more aggressive. He then abused his wife, as so many other times. What he didn't know was that this time would be the last. A few minutes later, fatigue had overcome John, who was sleeping deeply on his back. Lorena fell asleep after being abused, but woke up before him. Making as little noise as possible, she went to the kitchen to pour herself a glass of water, and an idea crossed her mind. Lorena stared at the knives she used so much every day. Specifically, she focused on the most prominent one, with a long and sharp blade. She gripped it and returned to the master bedroom. Upon confirming that John was still sleeping, she decided to act. She removed the sheets, grabbed her partner's penis with her free hand, and cut it off using the utensil she brought with her. John could do nothing but wake up screaming. Clutching the mutilated member, Lorena fled the bedroom and the house. She found the car keys, got in, started the engine, and sped away. She only stopped momentarily at a red light, then realized she was still holding the penis. At that moment, she clearly understood her actions. Horrified, she threw that piece of flesh out the window. The woman drove non-stop to Chenna's house. Seeing the blood, the other woman thought John had hurt her worse than ever, until the young woman told her what she had done. Calmly, they decided to call 911. Lorena did not consider that she had acted unjustly and was willing to tell her truth. At the same time, at the Bobbitt's house, John managed to stop the bleeding using a sheet. He then called a friend who took him to the nearest hospital, Prince William. The doctors understood the severity of the wound, but they were not ready to treat it themselves. Despite the late hour, they reached out to microsurgeon and urologist James Hundred and the surgeon David Berman. Even these two experienced specialists were stunned by the situation. However, they informed John they could reattach the limb, but there was an issue. Without the missing part, the task was impossible. Simultaneously, officers questioned Lorena at Jana's residence. The young woman recounted the years of abuse she had suffered. She spoke about the previous complaints, the helplessness all that caused her, and how she had acted desperately and instinctively. However, and according to her later on, the police seemed more interested in knowing the exact location of the penis than in the background of all that. She sighed and told them she had thrown it in a field near a 7-Eleven store. Thanks to these directions, another group of officers and some paramedics were able to find the member in a garden to keep it in good condition. An officer went into the 7-Eleven and requested a container with ice. They gave him a hot dogs box, which also served to place the amputated part and take it to the hospital. The surgery began shortly after 6 in the morning and lasted 9 hours. It was necessary to connect the arteries, veins, and nerves so that John could regain mobility in that part of the body. It was such a delicate and unusual procedure that neither Sen nor Berman could guarantee that it would go well. In the end, the operation was successful. For her part, Lorena was preventively detained at the Manassas Police Department. Her testimony and the discovery of the knife were sufficient evidence to deprive her of her freedom while the investigation continued. The case of Lorena Bobbitt is far from over. That was just the beginning of a socio-cultural phenomenon. Following that eventful night, Lorena underwent multiple interrogations. She always started by narrating the sufferings that had led her to make such a terrible decision against her husband. A statistic also supported her testimony. Around that time, 1 million cases of abuse were recorded in the United States, although only about 100,000 were reported. Gender violence had become a constant among couples. Very few women went to the police, but those who were supposed to protect them not only ignored them, they often blamed them for inciting the attacks, regardless of the reasons. Due to the mutilation, Lorena could be heard more than any other victim in her situation. Even so, for justice, she had committed a crime and should also answer to a court. On August 5th of 1993, the first judicial process began that was focused on the castration. Lorena repeated her ordeal and even shared a detail that few knew. Once pregnant, John forced her to abort, believing she was incapable of raising a child. She added that her husband lacked a stable job and spent his limited money on drinks. Therefore, it was she who had to take care of the house maintenance. Lorena's testimonies were clear and forceful. In turn, her defense emphasized that at the moment of cutting off her husband's member, she experienced a temporary insanity episode, mixed with self-defense instinct. Another attack occurred at the same time, targeting John. He was charged with marital sexual assault. He maintained that on the night of June 23rd, he had not abused her and that she had tried to seduce him when he just wanted to sleep. However, his later statements contradicted this information. Among other things, he would admit to having relations with his wife. Despite everything, in November of 1993, he was declared innocent, but the verdict of the first trial was still pending. This occurred on January 22, 1994, and was beneficial for Lorena. She too was found innocent of all charges for attacking her husband. The judge ordered her to be confined in the Central State Hospital in Pittsburgh, where she should be evaluated by specialists for 45 days. Each of these trials had overwhelming media coverage, which resulted in a great intervention of public opinion. Women identified with Lorena, her suffering, and her retaliation, whereas men were disturbed. Anyone with a history of domestic violence might think something similar could happen to them. The case of Lorena and John Bobbitt had transcended the police blotter to become everyday common talk, a casual conversation. And that's how it also affected the lives of its protagonists. After the trials concluded, Lorena and John Bobbitt became highly sought after by the media and entertainment industry. She gave an interview to the ABC Network News as soon as she left Pittsburgh. There she emphasized that both she and her husband had been victims of a tragic situation. She just wanted to tell her story to help other women who were going through a hell like the one she had to live. For this reason, she declined to be on the Playboy magazine cover and returned to work as a manicurist. John's approach was very different. First, he wanted to make sure that he was always the only victim in the equation. He also disagreed with the lenient sentence given to the woman who mutilated him. Throughout all that time, Lorena and John Bobbitt remained legally married. They were only able to divorce in 1995. But once again, the furor over the case was far from disappearing. Curiously, after gaining fame, John was approached by the adult film industry. He starred in some films of that nature, although they did not work as expected. He then aspired to be a Las Vegas wrestler and comedian, trying to mingle with the jet set. He never managed to make any career and had to settle for working in the construction area and as a truck driver. In the sentimental field, he wanted to rebuild his life with a woman named Christina Elliott, and they got engaged, so there were good omens. But after a while, she reported him for gender violence. John received a 15-day prison sentence. As he left, he maintained his innocence but regretted his choice of partners. John was arrested again, although for different reasons, despite not avoiding trouble. He was accused of stealing over $50,000 worth of clothing from a store. This time, he defended himself with the argument that they were trying to smear him because he was famous and they wanted to take advantage of him. Though Lorena and John moved on, they reunited after 1995 in front of the camera. This happened in May of 2009 during the Columbia Broadcasting System television program The Insider. She said that he sent her Valentine's Day cards and roses as if he believed they were still married. John admitted it and apologized for all the bad things he had done to her. Lorena accepted his apologies. Although both appeared in the media again, that meeting became legendary. The case of Lorena Bobbitt never lost relevance and gained more importance in times of strong female struggle, where victims of beatings and abuse no longer hide and point out their tormentors. Lorena herself was concerned with continuing this awareness and therefore founded Lorena's Red Wagon, a non-governmental organization that helps women victims of domestic violence. Is this in any way a happy ending? Well, once again, you are going to decide that. Likewise, the woman reclaimed her original surname, Gallo, and formed a family of which she is proud. She knows her story will always spark controversy, but that doesn't frighten her. According to her, she is no longer a woman with fears.